The universe had never taken Earth seriously. Among the vast alliances of intelligent species, the graceful Volari with their bioships, the precise and cold Juntar with their AI-run fleets, the merchant-heavy Dazari with solar sails of light. The humans were the newcomers. Awkward, clunky, and loud. They still used combustion engines in some parts of their ships. Who does that in the 31st century? So, when the humans unveiled the USS Retribution, their so-called warship, the galactic community laughed. And not just in private meetings. Public news feeds replayed the unveiling with sarcastic commentary. The Retribution looked outdated even by 28th century standards. It was massive, boxy, and worst of all, slow. Even its weapons were mocked. Kinetic railguns, nuclear-tipped torpedoes, laser arrays. Barbaric, the Juntar ambassador said with a smirk during a press conference. The Volari giggled, openly. Why fire a slug when light bends more efficiently? They'd ask. Commander Thorn, the man chosen to helm the Retribution, said nothing. His face during those broadcasts remained expressionless, like stone under pressure. He was an old soldier, with a titanium spine and eyes that rarely blinked. But deep inside him, where the cameras couldn't see, the fury simmered. Back on Earth, Thorn trained his crew like they were preparing for the last war in history. Not just humans, he had a few alien allies who had been exiled by their kind for being too sympathetic to Earth's struggle. He welcomed them. Misfits made excellent soldiers. They had something to prove. Years passed, and Retribution barely moved from orbit. Everyone thought it was a joke, an old relic kept alive to boost human morale. But behind closed hangars, inside subterranean labs, engineers worked without sleep. No one noticed when Earth's defense budget quietly absorbed 40% of its total economy. No one paid attention when asteroids disappeared from the Kuiper Belt overnight. They called it gravitational drift. And then, it happened. The Volari laid claim to Tau Cygni, a system that had recently been terraformed by human pioneers. Despite treaties, despite decades of cooperation, they sent peacekeepers with particle lances and burned entire outposts from orbit. A distress signal reached Earth, but it was already too late. 500,000 colonists were gone. The Galactic Council called it a miscommunication. Commander Thorn called it war. The Retribution departed Earth space with no escort, no allied fleet. It moved slower than any modern ship, like a glacier in space. Reporters mocked its launch. Aliens streamed memes of Thorn's ship with captions like, "When your Uber is from 2000 BC. But Thorn wasn't trying to get there fast. He was calculating. He was waiting. The Volari fleets, sleek and curved like silver daggers, met the Retribution at the edge of the Tau Cygni system. Their commander broadcast a mocking message. "You should have stayed on your backward rock, human." Thorn replied with one word. Fire. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. The Retribution's first salvo shattered the laws of conventional warfare. Each railgun slug had been magnetically accelerated beyond known tolerances, wrapped in quantum destabilizers. When they hit, they didn't just puncture hulls. They imploded time and matter around them. Volari ships popped like soap bubbles in vacuum. And then came the torpedoes. Nuclear-tipped, yes, but fused with nanite delivery systems. On detonation, they swarmed surviving vessels, turning steel and biomatter into liquefied sludge. The Retribution's laser arrays didn't just burn. They sliced through energy shields like butter, reprogramming the frequencies of defense grids mid-battle. It wasn't just firepower. It was vengeance, mathematically optimized. When it was over, 100 Volari warships had been reduced to orbital dust. The universe stopped laughing. Debris floated like glittering snowflakes in the vacuum of Tau Cygni's orbit. Twisted metal, shattered biocraft organs, and fractured Volari banners drifted alongside frozen limbs and liquefied cockpits. Commander Thorn stood on the Retribution's bridge, staring silently at the aftermath. No cheers, no celebration, just a quiet, grim acknowledgement. "Status report," he said. His first officer, a Dazari defector named Elin, tapped through her console. Her translucent skin shimmered blue, reflecting the chaos outside. "All Valeri ships destroyed. No survivors. Scans detect no escape pods. They didn't expect to lose." Thorn nodded once. "Begin collecting black boxes. Prioritize their command logs." Elin glanced at him, hesitant. "And the colony?" Thorn's jaw tightened. "What's left of it?" The Retribution shifted course. Engines burned a deep, thunderous note, audible even within the sealed corridors of the ship. That sound wasn't propulsion. It was fury echoing through steel. As the warship descended into low orbit, it revealed the true scale of Valari cruelty. Cities reduced to blackened foundations, greenhouses incinerated, children's toys half melted beside skeletons. They hadn't just attacked, they had exterminated. One of the crew, a young human named Sasha, broke down at her station. "This was supposed to be a research colony. My brother was stationed here." No one spoke. Thorn's silence filled the void. "I want every inch of this site scanned," he ordered finally. "We're not leaving until we document everything. I want names, faces, anything we can recover." They stayed for 2 days. 2 long, heavy days. By the end of it, Thorn had a file thicker than any war report, a list of atrocities, time-stamped, and proof of high-level orders traced directly to the Valari Supreme Command. He didn't send it to Earth. He sent it to the entire galaxy. Every planet with a comlink, every station, every outpost, received a full broadcast from the Retribution. Footage of the bodies, the destruction, the orders signed in Valeri script. Then came Thorn's voice. This was not a mistake. This was not a miscommunication. This was genocide. And this was only your first judgment. The feed ended with a final image, the Retribution hovering above the ashes of the colony, weapons glowing faint red. That's when panic set in. The Valeri homeworld declared DEFCON 1. Fleets mobilized. Worlds went into lockdown. Even the Juntar, who had ridiculed Earth for decades, suddenly initiated diplomatic calls. But Thorn wasn't answering. He was already en route to his next target, Zahara, a key Valari military outpost responsible for coordinating the Tau Tigni campaign. This time, they were ready. Or so they thought. 52 warships formed a defensive perimeter around Zahara. Their captain, Yeltan, a legend among the Valari, was confident. His record was flawless. He'd never lost a single engagement. As the Retribution entered their space, they initiated immediate warning hails. Thorn didn't respond. Instead, the Retribution slowed even further, crawling, mocking them with its speed. Yeltan barked. "What kind of fool creeps into a lion's den?" Thorn smiled inside his command seat. "The kind holding a flamethrower." In that instant, the Retribution fired a pulse that blanketed space in silence. Every enemy ship blinked out of sensor range, not because they vanished, but because their systems overloaded from a directed EMP burst unlike anything known. Then came the real assault. Hypermines, cloaked in stealth, detonated like starbursts. Ships tore apart from the inside. Static rang through Valeri comms. Lights died. Yeltan's ship exploded before he even gave his first command. The war wasn't just technological, it was psychological. The galaxy didn't see a slow, outdated human warship anymore. They saw death. Word of Zahara's annihilation spread faster than any ship could travel. By the time Retribution left orbit, news feeds across the galaxy had already dissected the footage. Edited clips, expert breakdowns, alien analysts babbling in disbelief. The Juntar syndicates tried to spin it as a freak accident, an unfortunate anomaly. The Dazari consortium called it unjustified retaliation. But no one really believed that, because deep down, they all knew Retribution was just getting started. Inside the warship, the crew worked in silence. No high-fives, no music, no banners of triumph. They all wore the same haunted look Thorn did, because even if the rest of the galaxy had forgotten the burning of Tau Kini, they hadn't. Elin walked into Thorn's private quarters, eyes down. "Sir, Earth Command is requesting a full status update. They want to assess resource allocations moving forward." Thorn didn't even look up. "Tell them I'll send a report once justice is complete." Elin hesitated. "They might interpret that as insubordination." He turned his head slowly, his gaze heavy. "Let them. They can court-martial my corpse if they want." Outside, the Retribution plotted a course for a Valeri civilian megacity, Sci-Fi. Not a military target, not a command node, just a wealthy hub where Valeri nobles lived in peace, sipping synthesized wine under artificial suns. The crew questioned it. "Are we really hitting a civilian sector?" Sasha asked, her voice trembling. Thorn nodded. "We're sending a message. They killed 500,000 innocent colonists, burned children alive. Let them taste what they've served." "But no," he said coldly. "No more rules. The Council made their choice. The Valeri erased our mercy." He left the bridge without another word. What the crew didn't know was that Thorn had already sent a private broadcast to Seraphis 5. "Evacuate. You have 48 hours. Anyone still on the planet after that is not my concern." The galaxy screamed. News anchors declared him a terrorist. Political leaders issued condemnations. Alien celebrities hosted sobfests for the cameras. But in Seraphis 5, shuttles filled the skies. Wealthy elites clawed their way onto ships. The poor were left behind, of course. No one had room for them. 48 hours later, Retribution arrived. But it didn't fire. Not at first. Instead, it released hundreds of drones into orbit, each projecting a single message across every screen, every wall, every communication band. "This is what silence looks like. You were silent when we screamed." Then the warship launched its payload. But not explosives. Truth. Dozens of pods dropped into the city, each containing bodies. The remains of colonists from Tau Kigni, parents, children, scientists, all perfectly preserved in cryogenic stasis. The horror of their frozen expressions, their burned skin, their last moments, now unveiled to those who ignored it. The Valeri screamed, begged, rioted. Only then did Thorn drop a kinetic warhead, one single round, that obliterated the city's central plaza. It left the surrounding structures intact. No one knew if it was restraint or calculation, but the message was clear. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was a crusade. That night, as Retribution drifted away from Seraphis 5, Earth Command finally responded. Not with demands, but with silence. They knew they couldn't stop Thorn, and maybe, just maybe, they didn't want to. The outer rings of Valeri space began to crumble, not because of Retribution's weapons, but because of something far worse: fear. Colonies once loyal to the Valeri crown declared independence overnight. Supply lines broke down. Governors fled their posts. Refugees poured into neutral sectors, and with them came stories. Twisted and exaggerated versions of Thorn's campaign. Some said he could bend gravity with a thought. Others claimed Retribution carried a weapon that could erase entire bloodlines from DNA archives. It didn't matter what was true. What mattered was that everyone believed it. Inside the warship, morale had begun to shift. No longer just a crew of survivors, the team now saw themselves as something more. A symbol, a warning, a myth made real. Sasha walked into the armory, where Thorn was overseeing a new payload configuration. "Sir," she said, softer than usual. "There's a delegation from the Xanthari Compact requesting a parley. They say they want to offer safe harbor and a strategic alliance." Thorn didn't look up. Why? They say it's for peace, but they're also scared. Good. He adjusted the guidance module with a click. Tell them they can speak after we reach Korath Prime. Sasha hesitated. Korath. That's not a military target either. No, Thorne said. It's worse. It's where they train their military leaders. Korath Prime was more than just an academy. It was a cathedral of war for the Volari. Every general, every fleet admiral, every planetary enforcer, trained there, fed there, indoctrinated by centuries of supremacist doctrine. And now, Thorne would make it a graveyard. When the Retribution arrived in orbit, the Volari knew it was over. Their local defense grid lit up with thousands of fighters, turrets, anti-orbital cannons. Korath wasn't just a training ground. It was a fortress, but so was Retribution. The moment the first shot was fired, Thorne activated the Sheol protocol, a sequence Earth Command had classified as non-operational because it was deemed inhuman. Plasma curtains shielded the ship. Counter-missiles launched in spirals, intercepting every incoming barrage. And then came the assault drones. They weren't metal. They weren't machines. They were reconstructed corpses, Volari bodies recovered from the previous battles, reanimated with neural override chips, wrapped in explosive exoskins, and dropped like nightmares into the heart of the Academy. The Volari screamed as their own dead tore through command bunkers and lecture halls. Thorne watched from orbit. He gave no speeches this time. There was no message, because war, he knew, had its own language now. Within hours, Korath Prime was silent. Not destroyed, just silent. No signals, no survivors, just ruins and echoing alarms. Back on the bridge, Elend stared at the view. You really did it. You crushed their heart. Thorne said nothing. Elend turned to him, this time more direct. How far are you planning to take this? He looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, his eyes weren't fire. They were cold, like a tomb. Until they surrender, or until there's nothing left to surrender. That night, Sasha sat alone in her bunk, staring at her brother's photo. The man who once dreamed of mapping alien stars, now dead because of politics and greed. She clenched the photo tight, and she whispered, "Burn them all." The galaxy began to fracture under its own guilt. Even species who had once laughed at Earth, who had refused asylum to the colonists of Tau Tigni, now struggled to justify their silence. The Juntar syndicates, champions of logic, issued a rare public apology. The Desiree opened their ports to human refugees. The Cathari priesthood denounced the Volari as heretics to empathy. But none of it mattered to Thorne. Because Retribution didn't orbit systems anymore, it haunted them. Entire planets surrendered at the mere whisper of its arrival. Fleets disbanded. Armories detonated their own stockpiles rather than face the slaughter. The war was no longer strategic. It was theological. Back in Earth's orbit, leaders of the United Systems met in secret. Holograms of senators and generals blinked into a darkened chamber, their voices hushed like children hiding from a storm. "This is unsustainable," one admiral whispered. "He's rewriting interstellar law with every strike." "He's winning," said a senator, blunt and shaking. "Something we haven't done in 100 years." "He's turning Earth into a pariah," another shouted. "Do you think the Volari will forgive us if he goes too far?" The room fell quiet. Then the president of Earth, an aging woman with hollow eyes, spoke. "He's already gone too far, but I won't be the one to stop him. Will you?" No one answered. Aboard Retribution, Thorne studied the next target. Tylex 4, a synthetic world orbiting a dying star. It was home to the Valerie Data Nexus, a massive quantum core where military algorithms and strategic simulations were born. If Korath Prime was their sword, Tylex 4 was their brain. Elend approached cautiously. "Intel confirms the Nexus has locked itself down. No one in or out since Korath. They know we're coming. Thorn nodded. Then we make them open the door. The approach to Tylex 4 was uneventful. Too uneventful. No resistance, no warning hails, no gunfire, only silence. As Retribution breached orbit, something pulsed on their sensors. EMP signature massive, Sasha yelled. Too late. The Nexus fired a concentrated data scrambler, aimed not at weapons, but at memories, neural wipes, cognitive warfare, designed to erase combat instincts and overwrite emotional responses. Crew members screamed. Some collapsed. A few wept without knowing why. But not Thorn. The old soldier didn't blink. Override manual controls, lock AI systems, go analog. Elin's hands shook as she flipped heavy switches. Old Earth tech, installed just in case. Thorn always planned for betrayal, even from logic itself. He stormed toward the missile bay himself. No drones, no AI. Just him, his arm-mounted control tablet, and 4 payloads coded with preloaded vectors. As alarms blared and data flooded corrupted screens, Thorn did what he was trained to do. He launched the strike, manually. The first warhead pierced the Nexus's atmosphere like a spear from an ancient god. The second shattered its outer shell. The third hit the core directly. The fourth? That was personal. It carried a message, laser burned into the casing. You erased my people. I erase your future. Tylex 4 died screaming. Its death throes rippled across space like a ruptured nerve, causing comms blackouts across 6 systems. The Valeri High Command, wherever they were hiding now, had just lost their eyes, their ears, and their mind. Back aboard the bridge, the crew was recovering. Sasha gritted her teeth as she recalibrated the helm. Elin wiped blood from her ears. Thorn, unshaken, stared at the stars ahead. Where to next? Elin asked. Thorn didn't look at her. He just whispered, Homeworld. And for the first time since this war began, the crew felt something unfamiliar in their captain's voice. Not rage, not vengeance, finality. The stars seemed quieter now, as if space itself was holding its breath. The Valerie homeworld, Ytesra, lay like a jewel wrapped in the coils of its mighty defense rings, 30 orbital stations, 100,000 automated interceptors, fleet reserves parked in geosynchronous hold. A planet that had never been invaded, not once in its proud, arrogant history. Until now. Retribution didn't warp in like a thief in the night. It didn't mask its signal. It arrived slowly, defiantly, like an executioner sharpening his axe in full view of the gallows. Valerie citizens looked up into their skies, expecting salvation. Instead, they saw a warship move like a funeral dirge. Inside the command hall of Ytesra's Palace of Wings, panic erupted. Ministers screamed over each other. Defense admirals launched emergency protocols. Drones scrambled in swarms, forming protective lattices above the cities. But they were too late. Thorn had already calculated every orbit, every angle, every gap in their centuries-old defenses. On board Retribution, the crew suited up, not for battle, but for sacrifice. Sasha approached Thorn, her armor clinking gently. Her eyes were raw with exhaustion and resolve. You really think we're coming back from this? Thorn adjusted the weapon on his hip. We didn't come to survive. We came to finish it. Elin stood by the launch bay, double-checking each boarding pod. Valerie interceptors will be on us the moment we drop. That's the point, Thorn replied. We give them too many targets, too many fires. Let them choose which ones to die at first. As Retribution entered the atmosphere, the world below erupted in panic. Sirens howled. Evacuation orders blasted across buildings. People fought for shuttles. Some just stared at the sky, trembling. The pods launched. Thorn was in the first one. Screaming through the upper layers of Ytesra's atmosphere, His pod ignited countermeasures that blinded defense arrays. By the time it hit the ground, hard enough to crater stone, he was already out, plasma rifle in hand, smoke curling from his boots. The city he landed in was the Volari capital, Kiralta. White towers, floating rail systems, monuments of their superiority. He turned them into ruins. Pod after pod landed. Human boots hit Volari soil. Explosions cracked the air. Firestorms lit the skyline. Elin led a strike team into the Ministry of War. Sasha personally brought down a shuttle loaded with fleeing nobles. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. The people of Ytesra watched in disbelief as the slow, ugly human warship their leaders had once mocked became the herald of their empire's fall. Thorn stormed the Palace of Wings alone. He cut through guards with surgical precision, not rage, just focus, like a man crossing names off a list. By the time he reached the central throne chamber, only a single figure remained. The Volari High Chancellor, old, regal, trembling. You don't have to do this, the Chancellor whispered. We'll sign anything. We'll compensate your planet. End the war. Thorn stepped forward. War ended when you burned our children. He raised his weapon. The Chancellor shut his eyes. The blast echoed through the marble dome like the final breath of a dying god. Outside, the crew of Retribution regrouped at the palace steps. The skies, once filled with drones, now held only smoke. Thorn walked out, blood on his armor, ash on his boots. It's done, Sasha said, barely able to stand. Thorn looked up at the stars. Number 1, last message. Back aboard the ship, he activated the long-range transmitter. He didn't speak to just the Volari. He spoke to everyone. This is what happens when you mock our pain. When you erase our dead. When you call us backwards and slow while hiding your rot beneath gold. He paused. The next time you see a slow human warship, remember what followed it. He cut the signal. And for the first time since this began, the Retribution turned toward home. The journey back to Earth wasn't triumphant. It was solemn. Retribution moved even slower now, its hull scorched and pitted, engines groaning under the weight of too many battles. Not because it couldn't go faster, but because it chose not to. Let the galaxy watch. Let every eye see the scarred ship returning through the stars like a ghost of judgment. Inside, the crew was quiet. They had won, but none of them felt like victors. Sasha sat in the mess hall, staring at her untouched rations. The smell of burnt metal still clung to her skin. Around her, others barely spoke. A few drank in silence. A few cried. No one laughed. Elin stood alone on the observation deck, watching stars drift past like mourners in procession. She hadn't removed her armor since Ytesra. The blood had dried. The dents remained. She said nothing when Thorn joined her. It's over, she murmured. Thorn nodded. Then why doesn't it feel like it? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Earth appeared in the distance, small, blue, and quiet, a stark contrast to the horror they'd left behind. It was untouched, sheltered, unaware of the storm its sun had unleashed across the stars. As Retribution entered Earth orbit, a dozen warships flanked them. Not enemy ships. Earth Defense Fleet, fully armed, fully prepared. Elin saw the alerts flash on her console. They've locked targeting arrays. Thorn didn't flinch. Of course they have. A transmission crackled through. The President herself. Commander Thorn, you are ordered to surrender your vessel. Disarm all systems. Stand down immediately. Thorn stepped forward to the console, voice steady. No. Silence. Then, this is not a request. You are considered unstable. Your actions have endangered humanity's diplomatic standing with every known species. I preserved our future, Thorn cut in. I gave us back our dignity. You committed war crimes. He chuckled. a dry, bitter sound. Only if you think there's still a war left to judge. The president's voice dropped. We cannot allow retribution to land armed. This is your final warning. Thorn turned to his crew, Sasha, Elin, the dozens who had survived with him, through fire and screams. You don't have to stay, he said. You earned peace. You earned home. One by one, they stepped forward. We're not going anywhere, Sasha said. Elin locked eyes with Thorn. We came this far together. Let them fire. Thorn turned back to the comms. You want the retribution? He said calmly. Come take it. The Earth fleet didn't fire. Whether it was fear, guilt, or secret admiration, no one knew. Instead, they watched silently as retribution descended into Earth's atmosphere. Not to a city, not to a base. To the ashes of Tau Cygni, now a memorial site rebuilt on a remote Earth plateau. The place where it all began. Thorn stepped onto the soil, the wind cold and sharp. He walked until he stood in front of the monument, 500,000 names engraved in black stone. He removed his helmet. And finally, he allowed himself to cry. Not for the people he'd killed, but for the ones he couldn't save. The plateau was still. Even the wind seemed to quiet around the towering black stone, as if nature itself paid respect to the dead. The names carved into the monument shimmered faintly in the sun, each one a fragment of a world erased too soon. The retribution loomed behind Thorn, its shadow long and cold across the soil where 500,000 voices had once dreamed. He stood in silence for a long time. No orders, no weapons, no vengeance, just the names. Sasha approached slowly, her boots crunching over the gravel. They're waiting, she said softly. Thorn didn't turn. Let them wait. She glanced behind her. A small crowd had gathered. Soldiers, survivors, civilians, some wearing Earth's insignia, others without any allegiance at all. They came not for a celebration, not for a hero's welcome. They came to understand. What will you tell them? Sasha asked. The truth, Thorn replied. He stepped before them, unarmored, unguarded, unafraid. The man who had become a myth, the man who had turned a slow, outdated warship into the galaxy's most feared weapon. And now, the man who bore every burden of that transformation. I won't pretend to be a hero, he began. His voice was rough, quiet. I didn't do this to be remembered. I did it because no one else would. He paused, glancing at the names behind him. They mocked us. They laughed while we buried our families. They called us primitive while they burned our homes. And we waited. For justice, for answers, for mercy. But all we got was silence. His fists clenched. So I became the answer. A murmur went through the crowd. I did things no human should be proud of. I ordered strikes that will haunt me until my last breath. I turned our pain into fire, and I let it consume everything in its path. He looked up, his eyes dark and unwavering. But they'll never erase us again. The silence that followed was thicker than grief. And then, one by one, people lowered their heads, not in shame, not in condemnation, but in recognition, because they understood now. Not all monsters are born. Some are made, by betrayal, by silence, by the failure of the very laws meant to protect the innocent. That night, Thorn returned to Retribution one final time. He walked its quiet halls, past the battle-scarred bulkheads and scorched control panels. Every mark was a memory. Every burn, a lesson. He entered the command deck alone. Elin had left the helm powered down. Sasha had locked the weapons offline. There would be no more missions. He sat in the captain's chair and closed his eyes. A breath, a heartbeat, a moment of peace. Then he reached beneath the console and removed a small drive, one that had never been catalogued. It contained every order he'd given, every strike he'd authorized, every moment of doubt, every scream he had heard through the static. He stood, walked to the core, and slid it into the archive. So history would never forget. So no one could ever lie about what happened. So no one could ever say they didn't know. When Earth finally decommissioned the Retribution, they didn't scrap it. They buried it, whole in the mountains above the Tau Kigni Memorial. A tomb, a monument, a warning. Generations would visit it. Some would curse the man who commanded it. Others would call him a savior, but all would remember his name. Commander Elias Thorne, the slow human warship they all mocked, until he brought total destruction and forced the galaxy to never forget Earth again.